The Florida sun was already blazing, painting the sky with hues of orange and gold. It was a picture-perfect morning at Mar-a-Lago, the kind of day that promised leisurely rounds of golf and relaxed conversations. The air was thick with the scent of salt and blooming hibiscus, a gentle breeze rustling through the palm trees, and inside, Donald Trump was preparing to devour a towering stack of pancakes in the opulent Mar-a-Lago dining room. These weren't just any pancakes, they were a culinary masterpiece, fluffy and golden brown, drenched in syrup, and topped with a generous pat of butter. A breakfast fit for a president or perhaps a king. Suddenly the tranquility shattered. An aide burst into the room, pale and visibly anxious, clutching a tablet like it was a lifeline. His face was etched with worry, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He rushed to Trump's side and whispered urgently, his voice barely audible above the clinking of silverware. Trump froze mid-bite, a forkful of pancakes suspended in mid-air. The sweetness of the syrup suddenly turned sour. The news hit him like a physical blow. Trump's face, already bronzed from the Florida sun, shifted from orange to a dangerous crimson in a matter of seconds. His eyes narrowed, and a vein throbbed ominously in his forehead. In a fit of presidential rage, the pancakes flew, launched across the room with surprising force, creating a syrupy explosion that coated everything in its path. The once perfect stack became a sticky, messy projectile. Secret Service agents, ever vigilant, flinched instinctively as the porcelain plate shattered against a gilded wall, sending shards of ceramic and splatters of syrup in every direction. The room was silent for a beat, save for the dripping of syrup. "Canada!" Trump bellowed, his voice booming and echoing through the hallowed halls of Mar-a-Lago. The force of his outburst seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. "Trudeau did what?" The question hung in the air, laced with disbelief and fury. The thought of the Canadian Prime Minister being the source of his morning's disruption was almost too much to bear. The aide stood motionless, his eyes darting nervously around the room, wishing with every fiber of his being that he could simply disappear into the ornate wallpaper. He was the bearer of bad news, and in Trump's world, that was a dangerous position to be in. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of anger, it was personal, a deep-seated affront to Trump's sense of power and control. This was a challenge, and Donald Trump never backed down from a challenge. Canada, the polite and unassuming neighbor to the north, had just slammed the door shut on America, creating a diplomatic crisis of epic proportions. The friendly facade had crumbled, revealing a steely resolve. And not just any door, the most strategically important one, the one that provided access to Alaska, a vital part of American territory. This was more than just a border dispute, it was a matter of national security. It was like your roommate, the one you always thought was your friend, suddenly changing the locks while you were just out for a carton of milk. A betrayal of trust, a slap in the face. In his mind, Trump could practically see Trudeau, smug and self-satisfied, yoga mat in hand, laughing at his misfortune. The image fueled his rage even further. The Pancake Massacre was just the opening salvo, the first sign of the storm that was about to break. The morning had taken a dramatic and unexpected turn. Chaos erupted in the aftermath. Frantic phone calls were made, lines buzzed with urgent conversations, orders were bellowed across crowded offices, demanding immediate action and solutions, and White House staffers scrambled to contain the fallout and mitigate the damage. Everyone knew that a presidential pancake toss was never a good omen. The day was no longer about leisurely rounds of golf or poring over classified documents. Those trivial matters were now firmly relegated to the back burner. It was about defending America's pride, its honor, and its territorial integrity. It was about showing the world that the United States would not be pushed around. It was about Alaska, a land of vast wilderness, strategic importance, and untapped resources. A land that Trump was determined to protect at all costs. And for Donald Trump, above all else, it was about showing the world that you simply do not mess with his country, that America was still a force to be reckoned with. Or perhaps more immediately, his breakfast. The pancakes may have been collateral damage, but they represented something more. A symbol of disrespect. The battle lines were drawn, the gauntlet had been thrown, and the stage was set for a political showdown of epic proportions between two nations, all triggered by a stack of pancakes and a perceived act of betrayal. So, what exactly triggered this unprecedented breakfast-fueled crisis? What series of events led to such a dramatic and unexpected turn of events between these two long-standing allies? The world watched with bated breath, wondering what could have possibly caused this sudden escalation. At the crack of dawn, Canada launched Operation Polar Gate, It was a meticulously planned and swiftly executed operation, catching everyone off guard. The scale and precision of the operation spoke volumes about the seriousness of the situation. Every single land border crossing between the United States and Alaska was immediately sealed. No exceptions were made. The border, once a symbol of friendship and cooperation, was now an impenetrable barrier. The vital Alaska Highway was completely blocked, guarded by Mounties and imposing concrete barriers. This effectively severed the primary land route connecting Alaska to the rest of the United States. Checkpoints sprang up seemingly overnight. No trucks were allowed to pass, no cars could proceed, and absolutely no tourists were permitted entry. Canada declared a massive 200-mile national security zone, effectively creating a buffer around its territory. This declaration included closing airspace to all non-commercial flights, adding another layer to the isolation. Furthermore, U.S. naval vessels were explicitly denied passage through Canadian waters, asserting complete control over their maritime domain. Alaska was suddenly transformed into an island, completely cut off from the continental United States by land and sea. The implications were staggering. Trudeau's office released a statement citing the need to protect Canadian sovereignty, addressing long-standing environmental concerns, and resolving a protracted lumber tariff dispute that had been simmering for years. It was perhaps the most polite yet assertive geopolitical power play in recent history, a masterclass in Canadian diplomacy. The effects of these actions were immediate and far-reaching. Complete chaos erupted at the border crossings, leaving countless truckers stranded and unable to deliver their goods, and tragically separating families who lived and worked on opposite sides of the border, resulting in a completely severed supply chain, disrupting the flow of essential goods. Alaska's vital lifeline, including food, critical medicine, and essential supplies, was effectively choked off, leaving the state in a precarious situation. Canada hadn't fired a single shot, yet they had managed to put Alaska in a complete and utter stranglehold, demonstrating a remarkable display of strategic control. The move completely blindsided Washington, sending shockwaves through the political establishment. The world's longest undefended border, a symbol of peace and cooperation, had suddenly become a formidable wall dividing two nations. And unsurprisingly, Trump was absolutely furious, his reaction echoing the disbelief and anger felt across the United States. In Alaska, the news hit like a bomb, a seismic jolt that reverberated through every town and village. The implications were immediately clear and deeply unsettling. Grocery shelves emptied within hours. Panic buying swept the state like a wildfire. Residents, gripped by fear and uncertainty, stripped stores bare, hoarding essential supplies. The rush for food, water, and other necessities created scenes of chaos and desperation. Governor Sarah Palin, back in the spotlight, wasted no time in addressing the escalating crisis. She declared a state of emergency, recognizing the immediate threat to the well-being and safety of all Alaskans. She called Canada's move an act of war by hockey puck-pushing socialists. A fiery condemnation that ignited further outrage and deepened the already strained international relations. Alaskans, fiercely independent, a people accustomed to self-reliance and resilience in the face of harsh conditions, suddenly felt abandoned and besieged, their spirit of self-sufficiency tested like never before. The isolation they had always embraced as a strength now felt like a vulnerability. The state's reliance on the outside world was exposed, revealing a fragile supply chain vulnerable to disruption. The federal government scrambled, a flurry of meetings and urgent consultations in Washington, D.C., as officials grappled with the unprecedented situation. Military planes airlifted supplies to Anchorage, a lifeline of essential goods desperately needed to alleviate the immediate shortages. But you can't run a state on airlifts alone. The scale of the crisis far exceeded the capacity of the emergency air bridge. Gas prices soared, reaching exorbitant levels as supplies dwindled. Fishermen were stranded, unable to venture out to sea, crippling a vital sector of the Alaskan economy. Construction halted, bringing projects to a standstill and leaving workers unemployed, and tourism vanished as visitors canceled trips, leaving hotels and attractions deserted. People needing medical care outside Alaska were stuck, their health and well-being jeopardized by the sudden blockade. The sense of isolation was overwhelming, amplified by the vast distances and challenging terrain that define Alaska. Alaskans are tough, but this was different. This wasn't a natural disaster or an act of God, this was a political act, a deliberate maneuver that had far-reaching and devastating consequences. That made them prisoners in their own home, cut off from the rest of the world and facing an uncertain future. The crisis was real, and the clock was ticking, each passing moment increasing the strain on resources and the anxiety of the population. Alaska was cut off, a strategic isolation that threatened to cripple the state, and the world was watching, captivated by the unfolding drama and the potential geopolitical ramifications. The stakes had never been higher, with the future of Alaska hanging in the balance. Survival instincts kicked in as Alaskans prepared to weather the storm, drawing on their deep-seated resilience and resourcefulness. In the lower 48, confusion and memes exploded online. Free Alaska trended as the internet joked about Mounties on Mooseback, but laughter turned to outrage. Cable news went into overdrive. Pundits demanded action. Protests erupted outside Canadian consulates. In border states, militias posted videos vowing to liberate the Alaska corridor. The crisis became a political football. Republicans called for action, Democrats urged diplomacy. The unity was shallow, partisan divides deepened, the public was angry, scared, and desperate for leadership. The situation was spiraling and the risk of escalation was real. America was on edge, the pressure was mounting. Then came the Trump tweetstorm. In all caps, he declared, "Justin Trudeau illegally blockaded Alaska, an act of war, sad." He called Trudeau a woke tyrant and threatened massive tariffs. He announced a Save Alaska rally in Montana, calling on all American patriots to join a convoy to the border. Trump wasn't just tweeting, he was mobilizing his base. The crisis became a reality TV spectacle. The stock market plunged, global leaders urged restraint, but Trump's supporters were electrified. His approval ratings soared among Republicans. He'd turned a complex crisis into a simple story, good versus evil. Trump was acting more presidential than the president. The stage was set for confrontation, at the border and within America. The world watched, holding its breath. The stakes had never been higher. The next move could change everything. The drama was just beginning. Diplomatic channels between Washington and Ottawa froze overnight. Ambassadors were recalled, embassies went quiet, and all non-essential communications stopped. The Biden administration urged calm, but their calls sounded weak against Trump's fiery rhetoric. Intelligence sharing and military cooperation became awkward and tense. The trust between the U.S. and Canada, once unbreakable, was shattered. China and Russia seized the moment, amplifying the conflict for their own gain. The diplomatic freeze was a global problem, not just a North American one. The world's strongest alliance was cracking. The consequences were unpredictable. The blockade's economic shockwaves hit hard. Trade between the U.S. and Canada, worth billions daily, ground to a halt. The auto industry stalled, prices for Canadian goods soared, and border towns suffered. Energy markets panicked as pipeline threats loomed. Heating bills spiked in the Midwest, all because of a highway dispute. Human stories emerged, separated families, stranded tourists, and disrupted sports leagues. The Great Lakes became a dividing line. The crisis was death by 1,000 cuts. The relationship, once taken for granted, was bleeding out. Everyday life was upended, the pain was everywhere. Then, a bombshell leak. Secret Canadian-Russian talks in Iceland. Documents suggested Canada secured Russian support before the blockade. Russia offered to ship supplies to Alaska, at a price. In return, Canada would ease up on Russian naval activity in the Arctic. The Trudeau government denied everything, calling it Russian disinformation. But the damage was done. Doubt and paranoia spread. NATO was thrown into crisis. The Alaska blockade was now entangled in global power games. The stakes had just gone nuclear. July 18, 2025. The world stands on a cliff's edge. Alaska is isolated. The U.S.-Canada border a line of confrontation. Trump's convoy heads for the border. The Canadian government won't budge. The global economy shakes. Alliances fracture. What happens if the convoy arrives? One mistake could spark war. The crisis is bigger than Alaska. It's about the future of the world order. If the U.S. and Canada can fall apart, what hope is there for anyone else? The next days will define our future. Will we rebuild the bridge or watch it burn? The world holds its breath.